A new pre-order bonus has been added to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. They have new DLC coming out, which means we're going to get an expanded dex, hopefully soon. But the important bit is that as an early purchase bonus, there is a Hisui and Zoroark running around, and that means that you can now use both that and the pre-evolution Hisui and Zorua, which is viable in Little Cup. So that begs the question, how good is it? Is it good, bad, mid, anywhere in between? And what all does the competitive community, what are they running on this brand new addition to the tier? If we look at the viability rankings, it has a provisional rank of A-. What makes it that way? Is it better than the other one, which is Zorua-U Novan? And is it really worth using on a lot of different team styles? That's what I'm hoping to go over. Now, before I get into it, if you could like, share, and subscribe, I'd very much appreciate it. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. And make sure to always have a good day. Now let's get into it. How Zorua-H is different from Zorua-U is that Zorua-U has higher base attack, higher base HP, but then you have less special attack and less speed. I mean, that's not even bad special attack, it's just that you have 5 more on Zorua-H, so it's whatever. You technically have a higher speed stat, but it doesn't change how much you have at level 5. If it got up to, like, 18, I think it would just be straight up better, which is funny, but what exactly does it have that... What do they share? What's different? So, they both have knockoff and they both have U-turn, which is really, really good. The main issue with Zorua-H is that, although you still have knock and U-turn, it's significantly weaker as a result of lower base attack, as well as you are not dark type, so you don't have stab on knockoff. So that's unfortunate. You still can run defensive investment. I'm not sure on the exact set that you want to run, honestly. Like, oh, sure, I want to run knockoff and U-turn, but do I want to run more investment in that, or do I want to make it more bulky? I have Will-O-Wisp, which is a really different, really, really big. Being able to burn something that would otherwise really mess you up is pretty fantastic. It's pretty crazy. You also have a whole bunch of options for your 4th move. Do you want to run Bitter Malice, which is the signature move? The reason why I bring that up is that I was like, oh, well, what about Pawniard? Because Pawniard runs Defiant, and whenever you get a stat lower, then you get a sharp attack increase. It doesn't really matter too much because you just have Will-O-Wisp anyway, and it's whatever. And also, Bitter Malice just helps with so many matchups. Like, oh, look, Crabrawler's trying to set up on me because it has Terra Fire, and that means I can't use Will-O-Wisp. Well, I just use Bitter Malice, and then it loses a whole bunch of HP, and now it's kind of stuck. So there's that. You have Dark Pulse for hitting others, Zorua-H. It depends on how you want to run that. Extra Sensory for hitting fighting types even harder if you want that. Hex is a really nice addition because you can do Hex plus Will-O-Wisp. And even though you don't have a lot of special investment, heck, even on Timid, or Jolly I should say, you still equal how much attack you have. So technically, you can run Hex and have it be really dangerous because you have Stab boost plus Will-O-Wisp boost. 130 base power is nothing, just really... It's not bad. It's not bad. And also you can knock off Eviolize to make it even more powerful. So there's that. If you want to, you could probably also run a Timid spread, which decreases the attack instead. And then if you want to do that, you can. And then just be more especially offensively focused. It depends on how you want to run it. There are no guaranteed spreads yet. It's way too new. You have Memento. Both of them have Memento, and I think it's a really good option for allowing... Like, this is meant to be a bulky support because you have knockoff U-turn for Momentum, and then Will-O-Wisp to burn. And then Memento is just sort of the cherry on top of just like, oh yeah, so now something's burned. So in order to make sure that it can't do anything to my setup sweeper in the back, I'll just Memento on it as well. So it could be really, really fantastic. But I prefer it more on Zorua-U as opposed to Zorua-H. It just feels like you could have better utility out of like Terra Blast Fighting, for example, so that way you can break over Pawniard just to make sure. And you'll see it on the setup sweeper variant as well. You have Shadow Sneak. Shadow Sneak is kind of alright. I've seen it used, and I was building with it myself, but it's kind of okay-ish. The reason why is that Zorua-U already has Sucker Punch, and Sucker Punch is already better by the fact that you have a higher base power, a higher attack stat, as well as stab. And you can also fake out your opponent with it. That's significantly better. Like, just Shadow Sneak's not bad by any stretch. It's just much worse, unfortunately. So, you still have Taunt. You still have Trick. I don't like Trick too much on Zorua, but you can have Taunt. That's really nice. The one thing that's really funny is that you get Comeuppance, which if you're hit by attack, you return, 1.5 times damage. And I want to see this used. I want to see it used, but I don't think it's good yet. And it's kind of funny. I have seen videos of Zorua doing counter things. Zounter. It has counter, so it returns double damage, and that can be really funny to do because your opponent just U-turns into you think it's a really safe play, and then you just bonk whatever comes in, and that's pretty funny. But what sets this Zorua apart is that you want to run extra sensory a lot more often because it's a dark type and it gets more threatened by fighting types, so that's pretty nice. You can still do like Calm Mind. You have, if you want to, you can run Night Daze because that's a funny move to run. You still have U-turn, knockoff. You still have Memento. Swords Dance. You have Swords Dance so that way you can be very threatening as a sweeper. If you want to, I'm not sure if it's really all the best. You still have Terra Blast. You still have pretty deep move pool, all things considered. Do you get Thief on this? Indeed you do, so you can run that if you want to, but I much prefer it on Zorua, because like, oh yeah, you get knocked off, and then you can go and steal an item, and it's still stabbed, it's pretty alright. So maybe, but the point is, both of these have a lot of flexibility in how they can be run as support variants, but then that also begs the question, what about purely offensively? So we have Setup Sweeper Zorua-H. I think this one's really, really nice as a result of Terra Blast's stab. And plus, you're going off of your really good special attack as opposed to the much worse 65 regular attack. It's not bad, but like even on a Choice Scarf set, it's just like very mid, unfortunately. This is the recommended one. You can also run Extra Sensory here because you can run that. But the main issue with this Zorua as opposed to this Setup Sweeper is that this fits so wonderfully on webs, and also because of Bitter Malice, you can run Hex if you want. You can run Dark Pulse for the mirror, as I mentioned before. But being able to run this and also be like, oh yeah, I'm disguised as Pawniard, and people think, oh yeah, you know, I just attacked this with a fighting type move. But what happens if your opponent can't tell whether or not this is the typical offensive Swords Dance Pawniard or the Setup Sweeper Zorua-H, and they have very different ways of being dealt with. And also you can run like whatever Terra type you want. You want to go Terra Ground, so that way you're immune to Electric type Thunder Wave, or just Paralysis in general. And then you can still beat over Pawniard. Go for it. Pawniard probably doesn't want to run that, but it can. It can also run Terra type Flying. But also, you don't know how to deal with this until it starts setting up, which can be really threatening to deal with. And it can create a lot of anxiety. Bitter Malice if you want. You still have Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball is very reliable, and if you want to have a much better Pawniard matchup so that way you don't have to be forced to Terrastalize, and then Pawniard can do annoying things, then there you go. Also on webs, it has Defiant boosted because of Sticky Web, and you don't want to give it any more support than it already has, so you kind of just have to play around it. Otherwise, I think it's really good, especially on webs, because it sort of fills what Gastly would do before it got banned, of having a nasty plot set, and then you would use this as both a sweeper and a spin blocker, and it's really hard to deal with. But now that Gastly's gone, you can just use this instead. And you also have the benefit of being immune to both Rapid Spin and Ghost-type moves. So before, with Gastly, it's like, oh yeah, well, Drifloon can just kill you because it has Shadow Ball if it gets the speed boost. Well, now it can't. And also, you can't get Revenge killed by either of Quick Attack, Extreme Speed, or Shadow Sneak, because you have immunities to both. They're really valuable immunities. However, you're kind of slow overall. If we go to the viability rankings, Diglett has 20 speed, Pawniard has 16, Toadstool has variable, but Magnemite typically has 22 because it has a Choice Scarf. Mudbraid depends on whether you're running Scarf or not. Quaxley can boost its speed with Rapid Spin. Corbrawler hits 17, Deerling hits 18, Glimmet sets up Toxic Spikes, but it's 16 speed. Mary doesn't really care because it's a wall. Nimble can go fast with First Impression. Surskit lowers your speed with Sticky Web, and it can be really really bad versus a lot of hyper offense because like, oh yeah, well, Weasel gets up to 38 speed, Psyduck gets up to 30, Scarf Mankey outspeeds you and can hit you with a whole bunch of stuff, and that can be really annoying. It doesn't do very much to stop setup sweepers like Choodle or... Where's Shelder? Oh, it's down there, I'm dumb. But Choodle and Shelder both have Shell Smash, and it's significantly worse against them because it doesn't have access to Sucker Punch. And also you can surprise somebody with a really fast knockoff in order to make them... It really deals with them well, because although this is, like, it's kind of slow-ish, this Choice Scarfer can deal with a lot of other things better. Like, oh yeah, you know, Scarf it outspeeds Diglett because of the Scarf. It can deal with Toad School pretty well because it's very physically frail. You can knock off Magnemite's Scarf and make it a lot more of a liability. You can outspeed Quaxly after +1. You naturally outspeed Deerling. I mean, you still have to worry about Nimble because, I mean, Nimble's kind of bad for this matchup. But point is, you have a lot more utility as a result of having this much faster speed stat, and you still have Stab Knockoff, which can do a lot of progress versus your opponent. Whereas this is much more passive, almost. Like, this bulky support is not meant to do a whole bunch of damage to the opponent. It's meant to be, you knock off, you U-turn, you Will-O-Wisp, and then you support your teammates. It's not meant to do much by itself, and that can be a bit of an issue, especially when Zorua, if you give it the right set on the pivot, it can get a lot of progress and be really hard to deal with because you can knock off your opponent, you can then U-turn out as a really good momentum, and it still does a lot of damage because of how high your attack is with a whole bunch of investment. You're still decently fast, like obviously not blazing fast, but you can still do a lot with that. Sucker Punch is fantastic. You can also mix and match if you want to run Sucker Punch or not, and your opponent has to guess and predict around that, whereas it's like, oh, well, the best priority this really has is Shadow Sneak, so it just sort of has to deal with that. And then you have Taunt, you have Memento, you have a whole bunch of other stuff that can really be really good team support that doesn't just be like, oh, well, I mean, this is just like solely setup sweeper stuff. And that can be really annoying for like really, really fantastic team support. Just like, oh yeah, well, I can set up my own Shelter, my own Pawniard, so that way they can then sweep and win the game. Whereas Zorua is a lot more aggressive, funnily enough, where it's meant to be much more of a catch-all. It has a lot more utility because, oh, well, I can just run knockoff. It also still is decently bulky because of Eviolite. And it can be really annoying because of Sucker Punch. And the Choice Scarf variant can be really threatening, that your opponent isn't sure, like, well, do I have to deal with something exceedingly fast? Can I deal with this with my own Scarfer? Or will it knock off my own Choice Scarf and then I have really, really bad speed control for the rest of the game? And this just walks circles around me. What kind of Terra Blast is it running? All the sorts of stuff. So, excuse me. In total, Zorua is, funnily enough, more aggressive team support. Well, this is more passive, but you can still be really threatening with Setup Sweeper. But now that we've gotten over like what the roles are for the most part, what are they both good against, and what exactly can you replace them with? You know, because there are plenty of ghosts, and there are obviously a few knockoff users. These are some of the good ones, but what else could you technically replace these with if you want to have either the ghost or the knockoff user? So the other ghosts, they're all right. We have the balloon over here, Drifloon, and its niche is that it has Defog. It also has Unburden. You still have access to Will-O-Wisp, and it can be really hard to deal with because, well, you cannot speed it very often after the Unburden boost. So even if you're like, oh, well, you know, I could just run my Pawniard, and then if I'm running a Choice Scarf variant, if I want to do that, because some people still do, it's not terrible. Like, oh yeah, I could just use Choice Scarf Pawniard, and then I don't have to deal with the Zorua, because I can just hit it with really powerful Night Slash, and then Bozo, get wrecked. Well, that doesn't really happen with Drifloon. It's just way too fast. The usual set also runs Terra Blast Fighting. I haven't seen it run too often because people also like using Destiny Bond, which can be exceedingly difficult to deal with when you have substitute support. So you substitute up after you have the Oranberry proc, or you use substitute to proc your Oranberry, and then you have a really powerful Acrobatics. You can burn anything that really can take your attacks, and then if you're about to die, well, then you can still trade really well because, oh, well, I just Destiny Bond, and now they can't do anything, so L. There you go. It's definitely the biggest competition that Zorua-H has, but I feel like they both do different things because you need to have the Unburden boost to really be able to do a lot with Drifloon, and that makes it very weird as a result. Next up, we got Thumbleweed over here. It's kind of eh. The main issue is that although it's got Rapid Spin, it can be a spinner that spin blocks by itself. Just look at how terrible this stat line is. Like, no bulk, 40 HP, 30 defense, 35 special defense, some, like, okay attack. Power-up really helps you out here. Like, you can have really threatening Grass Stab. And Wind Rider, although it's a good ability, because it gives you a wind move immunity, it's kind of okay at best, so. And then Strength Sap is good, reliable recovery, but you struggle even harder than everybody else does with Pawn because of Defiant. Because if you use Strength Sap on it, it gets a +1 attack, And you do not want to give that to Pawn. You really don't. Especially when it's got base 85 attack, stab, sucker punch, and iron head. And it will often want to use Sword Stance anyway. And if it's using Stealth Rock, well then congratulations, you just made it a pseudo setup sweeper, and now it might just sweep your entire team. Whoops! It's not bad because you can still use it as a rapid spinner that can absorb Spore as well as take rapid spin. So it's got a pretty good matchup versus Toad, but it's just very eh. Next up, we got what the dog doing. And the dog is doing spin blocking things, and it's pretty good at it. You'll see it used quite often because it just takes a whole bunch of hits because it can. It has the ability Fluffy, which means that you'd have 1/2 damage from contact moves and 2 times damage from fire moves. So that's pretty cool. But overall, it's just kind of... It's not bad, it's just comparatively more passive. Like, if you want to run Rest, you can run Yawn instead. If you're a Vito, you can run Sleep Talk, Rest, and then also Roar, because you're crazy and you run this sort of thing. But you can still run, like, Roar or Rest or a whole bunch of other stuff, and you have a pretty good move pool, all things considered. But the issue is that with Gastly now being gone, Shadow Sneak is significantly worse. Like, your attack isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's just like, well, what am I even going to be Shadow Sneaking into? Because, I mean, Pawniard's still around. We still have the much better Ghosts. Zorua-H just blanks it. So, it's okay, but, like, it's a pure spin blocker that can't do too much outside of pure spin blocking. So, it's meh. It's okay. Next up is the Teacup. Some people still keep using this. It's like an obligatory mention because people still use it. Shoutouts to Ace Hunter. But, like, why? I know it's like it's got a good special attack stat, yeah, but Zorua-H has a better one. It has a better speed. And you can disguise. And this is entirely reliant on the ability to get weak armor up. And yes, you can use Terrorblast Fighting in order to break over Pawniard. But also, you're just going to eventually fall because of how many weak armors there are. Because if you keep on getting hit and hit and hit, then you're going to lose your Eviolite boost. If you get hit by a weak knockoff by Toad, then yeah, you're going to nasty plot and get a big speed boost, but you're going to be really frail afterwards. So that means that what the dog doing? Or Bramblin, or even Zorua-H with its own Shadow Sneak can just start breaking over you. And you can't even hit it with Terrorblast Fighting either. Like, it's just so bad for the Teacup. Like, oh yeah, I want to run a Ghost. Like, do not run Sinisty. Why do people keep running Sinisty? It just doesn't work. I've never seen it work out in high-level play. You still actually have a pretty good move pool. You still have Will-O-Wisp. I mean, if you could technically run Baton past him. That'd be funny. You also have Hex. Hex is just such good utility because, oh yeah, it's got 65, so it becomes 130 base power. Zorua-H has it. The Balloon has it. Sinisty gets it. Like, it has weak armor, and like you can technically sweep with it, and that's the utility. But it's just so bad. Like, yeah, you have stored power, but you can't really make this into, like, your own version of Flittle, because Flittle was terrorizing the tier because it had Speed Boost, Calm Mind, Stored Power, and that was broken. But the important bit is, like, it's just kind of mid. You'll sometimes see it run because it's got not bad bulk, and it's got a good special attack stat, and weak armor is a really good ability. But I don't see any reason to run the Teacup, especially now that Zorua-H is here, so... Overall, Zorua-H is, like... If we're ranking these ghosts, it's like tied for first, possibly guaranteed second, just because, oh yeah, this has Defog, and it's the only like reasonable user of it. And then you also have Substitute, and it can trade really well, so there's all that. It's got a lot going for it. But what about the other knockoff users? Because one of the big things that Zorua-U has, the Dark version of Zora, is a really powerful stab knockoff, and then you can also U-turn out and possibly trap some stuff that you otherwise really shouldn't. So... What is competing in that slot? And that is quite a few things, actually. You have Toad School, which is far and away the best of all the knockoff users because it's got such good utility over the course of every single game. Earth Power, it's got knockoff, Rapid Spin, Power Whip, all these really good traits. You have a wonderful special defense stat. You have a lot of investment. You can go into literally all your stats. It's pretty crazy. But also you have a really good utility move pool. You got Spore, you got Spikes, you also have Toxic Spikes. I've never seen this run, but it's just so significantly funny. I was just like, oh yeah, it just gets that because it can. I don't know why, it just does. You can also run Giga Drain on a more specially offensive set, and that gives you some pretty not necessarily reliable, but is really hard to wear down Toad if it has Giga Drain, and you play your cards right. It's so hard to deal with. Next up, third best is Wingull. I think that both of the other Zoruas are better for the express purpose of having stronger and or more utility from their knockoffs. This Wingull's not bad. Like, Surf plus Hurricane's really threatening stab combination. Knockoff just as more of a utility move as opposed to damage. And then you still have Roost, all sorts of stuff. And you have Hydration, so you can do some annoying stuff versus rain teams, which is funny. And you have a really good speed set of 19. Got some decent bulk. I think the main issue just comes from, like, it doesn't really do everything. Whereas with Zorua or Zorua-H, it's just like, oh yeah, it has knockoff. And then also has, I mean, this also has U-turn. But, like, where are you slotting it? It has U-turn, but it doesn't have stuff like priority. It doesn't have status conditions. This is more meant to be an all-out attacker. This is like, oh yeah, it's a really fast, especially offensive threat. And it just also sort of steamrolls some teams because of how strong it is. So there's that. So that's fun. Next up is Shroodle. I don't think it's good, and for whatever reason, I keep on seeing it in tournament. It's like, oh yeah, it just copycats, and then it kills Diglett, and then it's just like, haha, Nene, get screwed over. And I never get to use this and have it work out so well. And that's because it's got, like, kind of bad bulk. It's sort of like almost worse Wingull. Because with Wingull, it's much better because you have Roost as reliable recovery. And then you're also stupidly fast at 19. Like, this is not by any means bad. It's just like, oh yeah, you have knockoff plus U-turn. You still have that really good combination. But it's not as strong as Zora was because you don't have stab knockoff. Parting Shot is nice because that allows you to go into other setup sweepers and have safe switching. And then you have Copycat, so that way you can knock off and then Copycat the knockoff, and then it becomes a priority move, which can be really annoying as a result of Prankster, which boosts your priority move, your status moves by 1. So you have knockoff, U-turn, Copycat. Also, Copycat has additional utility, so that way if your opponent is running Surskit, and they have Sticky Web, what you can do is instead of just sort of like taking Sticky Web and being done with it, what you can do is that when the Surskit switches in, the last move, well, I'm sorry, when the Surskit moves is likely going to set up Sticky Web, so what you can do with Shroodle is come in, use Copycat on the same, so I have to get the sequencing right. So Surskit, you have, let's just say, like, Wingull versus Surskit. You have your Wingull switch out, go into Shroodle, then Surskit sets up Sticky Web. You can then Copycat the Sticky Web and put it on your opponent's field, and that's some really, really good utility of just having Prankster Copycat. And then you still have good utility because of Parting Shot, and then if you want to, you can also run it as a Weather Setter. So it all depends on how you want to use it, but I think it's significantly worse off because it's got very limited applications. Even though it's got still pretty decently strong knock, I think Wingull's much better because it's so threatening, and you go to, like, something that can actually deal with it. Like, oh yeah, I go to my Marionette, and that can actually take the stab combination pretty well, and then it has to come in and take the knock from Wingull, and now it's much worse off for the rest of the game, so there's that. And then the last that we have is Tinkatank. It's just got tiny little baby hands. It does, like, no damage. Its attack is so bad. It's got 13. Like, at least with Shroodle, it gets up to 16, and that's a significant upgrade. But it's like, oh yeah, it sort of gets knocked. And then it has to rely on coverage from Ice Hammer in order to be able to beat over Toad. It's just so bad. And even though you have Thunder Wave and Stealth Rock as really good utility moves, is significantly worse off than either of the Zoruas, because it can't do much outside of utility. For example, if we go to Zorua-H again, or I can go to this one and bring that up. Because you have knockoff, and then you also have U-turn, and then you also have priority, and then you can also, you can really annoy Glimmet and other hazard setters that are slower than you. You can make it so that way Pawniard can't set up because of your taunt, and it's not Prankster, so it's not priority, so it's not immune. But then if you even do Zorua-H, and you're just like, oh, well, I want to have a Pokemon that can really punish setup attempts. Well, Will-O-Wisp, and then you can also run Hex, and then you still have knockoff, and you have U-turn, and you have a whole bunch of other stuff, because if you want to run Terra Blast, it's still stab. You have a lot of things going for it that, like, oh yeah, it's got rocks, and it can kind of fit on some teams. It's just so bad at using knockoff because of how weak it is. Like, even if I run, like, a little bit of investment, bam, same amount as Tinkatank. They both reach 13 with, but, like, if you want to, you can also do, like, a spread like this, where you focus a lot more on your offenses, and then you still have a little bit more to do bulk. And like that's a significantly more powerful knockoff. And then like Hex isn't even bad because you still have really high base. Why is this so bad? Give it like 10 more attack and it like jumps up an entire tier from like, where is it currently? B. It's at like B. If you gave it like 10 more attack, it would go up to like A-, because then it can actually do stuff that isn't just utility. Oh, poor Tinkatink, man. So in total, it's like they're both sort of like second best, because although Wingle's not bad, the primary function isn't really knockoff. It's more of a benefit of just having a fast, kind of frail, but like a fast water flying type that can also have recovery. It can't really help you versus a setup sweeper, unlike both of these Zoruas can, because you can run Shadow Sneak. Or, not Ball, Sneak, come on now. You still have Will-O-Wisp to prevent setup, so like, it's kind of annoying, but actually if we go to Calc, if we go Shoulder versus Wingle, because it's an recommended set, yeah, Shoulder can just sort of set up on it, and you can also do Terra Rock, and then, oh look, Hurricane can't even do a half, and then there's also the question of, well, is the Shoulder going to Terra or not into a Rock type, and then my Wingle just becomes setup fodder, and that's really bad, so both of these can prevent that via either Taunt or, really annoyingly, Will-O-Wisp. So it's not bad, it just is very specialized, whereas Toad just has so much going for it that it's so hard to argue, like, oh yeah, it's on like so many teams because you have knockoff plus rapid spin. Like, these are not bad, it's just like, well, this outclasses them, and they're kind of better than this. So, overall, kind of alright. So they're sort of neck and neck, kind of. So what exactly are they, like, what do you want to use these against? What are they so good against that makes them so high up on the viability rankings? That would be... That's the wrong set. They're both good versus other Drifloon. Spin blockers just really easily die. Especially just... Rest in peace, Bramblin. You were so good conceptually, and then your stat line just failed you. But Drifloon dies because if we once again go to the calc, and then we have Zorua versus Drifloon... Yeah, that ain't living. Even with a good amount of defense investment, it's just gone. And it's really easy to try and mimic yourself as either of Toad School or any of the Rapid Spinners, Toad School, Quaxley, that kind of stuff, and then just kill your opposing spin blocker because you have knockoff. And then you think, oh, well, you know, I can do that, and instead of using Zorua-U, I'm using Zorua-H, and it's got a much weaker knockoff, so what do? I mean, you can just use, you know, Bitter Malice with all the investment just kills. So there's that. And then you can probably run like Shadow Ball instead if you want. Or Hex. And Hex is still going to do a whole bunch of damage with maximum investment. And then also, if rocks are up, then congratulations, Drifloon's dead. So that's pretty cool. Next up, Toad. Although Toad is the best knockoff user because it has so many good matchups, it has really bad matchups versus both the Zorua forms. And that's because Zorua-H blocks Rapid Spin, and then it can do Knock into U-Turn, and then also if it wants to, it can burn you. So that can really damper your knockoff Rapid Spin and Power Whip damage, so that's all really annoying. And then what Zorua-U can do is that it can hit really hard with a knockoff and then U-turn immediately afterwards, and it becomes a really big liability, especially because Zorua-U can take knockoff so well. Like if we go to these spreads real quick, you take nothing there, and then U-turn still does a lot even without, like even with the Eviolite on, and then once you remove the Eviolite, then bam, it just becomes a 1-2 punch of just, well, I do roughly 10 damage, and the lowest roll I can get is 14. So even if I get low rolls on both knock of 9 and on U-turn of 14, Toad's going to be really suffering afterwards. So there's that. Once again, just now, yeah, you lose to both of them because Zorua-U just kills you with knockoff, and then Zorua-H just kills you because it has special coverage that it can use, and then also if you get burned, you're significantly worse off for the rest of the game. Because one of your things that actually kind of nice is that Power Whip is really powerful. It can really annoy a lot of Pokemon, so then, oh yeah, just... What happens if I cut your attack stat in half, I guess. So there's that. And then finally, the funny thing, both of them are really good versus Gothita, because they blanket stab move. Well, Zorua-U blanks the stab move, or you can run Zorua-H, and because of the interaction when it comes to how trapping is, it doesn't affect ghost types. So you can just do that and it's all A-okay. And then if you want to, you can be running Thunderbolt on this as opposed to Dark Pulse. And that can be really annoying. And then even if you trick Zorua a Choice Scarf, it's not going to mind it too much because you still have Knockoff and U-Turn. So there you go. And also you can really effectively deal with the Choice Scarf variant because you're faster. So that's pretty nice. Overall, you got some pretty good matchups. That's pretty cool. Now, what if I want to use Zorua-H specifically over Zorua-U? What exactly is the big benefit? You're significantly better versus the fighters by a significant degree. Being able to not allow Crabrawler to get back up HP, really fantastic. It has to rely on the much weaker coverage moves. And then also, if it's not running Terra-type Fire, then it just dies to Will-O-Wisp and becomes significantly worse off. So that's fun. Mankey sort of fell off in recent memory, but also just, oh yeah, I have a fighting immunity. And then I can really mess with my opponent, so that's all okay. I mean, it still has Night Slash, and it can be really annoying to deal with because of the U-turn shenanigans. But like, oh yeah, I just have a really good option to blank the opponent's close combat, and then if they think that it's actually a really good idea because I'm running Pawniard, but I have my illusion ability, so I'm disguised as Pawniard, then congratulations, Bozo, you're dead. So get nade. You also have a fantastic matchup versus Quaxly because you can just burn it. You just do what Gastly did from previous meta where you're just like, oh yeah, I try to rapid spin, and then, oh, darn, I get blocked. I'll try to liquidate instead, and then I get burned by... Then I get burned by Will-O-Wisp, or I get hit by Thunderbolt, so that's really bad. And also one of the good traits about Quaxly is that it's a bulky mon. It has Roost, and then you can also rapid spin liquidation. It's really hard to break over. And then also, if you want to, you can just knock it off, and then congratulations, Quaxly's ruined for the rest of the game, so L, bozo. Deerling is much worse off because it can't just use Headbutt to beat you over. So there's that. That could be really annoying to deal with. And although you can do Sucker Punch with Zorua-U, being able to either burn or blank a Headbutt in some fashion that your opponent otherwise thinks is exceedingly free can be really annoying for them to deal with, so that's funny. John Dark Souls, you're much better versus because you just disguise as something else and then you burn it, and when Nimble thinks it's perfectly fine to come in, such as disguising as a Toad School, then congratulations, you take the hit really well and then you burn the Nimble in exchange, so there's that. So fun. Fun, fun, fun. Overall, well, I want to go over what makes Zorua-U versus all of it worse off versus all of these. You have to run extra sensory in order to hit Crab. You speed tie with Mankey, so if you manage to win the speed tie, then that's cool, but otherwise it's a 50-50, and you're weak to U-turn, so that's not great. Quaxly can break your disguise via Rapid Spin, and if you're running bulky, then you can't do too much to really block that. You're slower than Deerling, and because you're slower, you can just get Paraflinched into Oblivion, Thunderbolt plus Headbutt, and then John Dark Souls just loves seeing you and wants to come in and just first impression you, and you die. So that's annoying. But what about Zorua-U? What does that have running for it? That would be... You block Prankster, which is pretty fantastic. Impidimp can be exceedingly annoying in some matchups, and being able to block the parting shot, meaning that it has to do a hard switch, and then you can also knock off Lyclay. That's really nice. And just having that harder hitting, like, it hits Ghost so much better, because even like, oh yeah, Grievard, it can just take it really well, can it? Well, no, then it just loses the Eviolite and makes it worse off throughout the rest of the game, and then Toad can come in and do a whole bunch of damage with the special moves, so L. You also have a much better matchup versus Shroodle, because Shroodle's got knockoff, and then you can blank parting shots, and then you can take knockoff pretty well yourself, and that can be really annoying to deal with, so that's fun. You also beat other Zorua, not your own, not Zorua-U. You beat Zorua-H because it's normal Ghost, and one of the few things that hits it is knockoff itself, so that's fun. Also, play around with spreads, see what you want to run. But also, spreads are weird. Don't... like, I was about to be like, oh yes, this is how you run Zorua-H. It's like, no. It's all too over the place. You don't really have anything yet. But then also, the Scarf set is much better at dealing with fast mons, such as Diglett, such as Scarf Magnemite. Whereas Zorua-H is just very slow. You can't do too much because it's got bad priority. Overall, Zorua-H looks so fantastic on paper, it's crazy. But then when we go to tournament, World Cup Winter League, week 6, it was available. It was a bit of a wet blanket, but like it wasn't bad by any stretch. Like here we have Hacker, aka Dormoney, versus RDL, and Nimble kills this. That's perfectly fine. And then you can really see the utility that it gets by being able to, like, oh yeah, Crabrawler is going to be really threatening with Bulk Up. It can deal with Diglett, it can deal with Pawniard, and, I mean, Nimble's got a bad matchup. So instead, it may seem like Diglett, but that's actually Zorua-H, and although it gets hit by an Ice Punch, it's got enough bulk to take it, and then you can Will-O-Wisp, and then you win the rest of the game, because now Crabrawler does so little damage, and then you can just kill with Hex, and it's perfectly fine. And because of this Zorua-H being here, then, oh yeah, it can also just kill over Greavard, because Greavard can't use Shadow Sneak, and that does so much. And Greavard's selling point is that it's just so hard to break sometimes. And actually, even if I check the calc of Nimble versus Greavard, let me check on that one real quick. How much is... Oh! I thought that was significantly more. Yeah, if there was no Zorua-H here, then Greavard could have just like reverse swept this team if it had enough support. So that's pretty crazy. Good to know. But then also back to Zorua-U. This was in a previous week, and it can be really useful because well, it just has a stronger knockoff. So like, oh yeah, I'm disguised as Krogunk, and then I can beat over this Wingull because it thinks that it's actually a Krogunk, and now it's all A-okay. And it has really good team support as a result. Like, Zorua-U isn't bad for being able to disguise as certain things, but being able to disguise as stuff like Krogunk or other things that are weak to Psychic-type moves is just really valuable. Because, like, oh yeah, there's Gothita running around, and then Gastly, when it was still legal, could run Psychic, that kind of stuff. So, it's got good utility there, and then I think that it just dies to Pawniard afterwards, but it's still fine because, oh. Huh. I thought it would have stayed in. Oh, well, I mean, you do have good matchups versus Gothita and Gastly. That's Life Orb Pawn? Alright, I probably should have done better research before doing this, but also, that's Life Orb Pawn. Alright, good to know. And then I think you do Terra Dark here, and then, yeah, okay. But point is, without the Zorua support, you couldn't beat over Wingull, and Wingull just really messes up this team because it's really hard to switch into, and nothing's faster after webs, so that's annoying. Then in this one, this was Surfy, he's my teammate, he's a goat, and he's versing Handpiol, and it's really good on webs, as I mentioned before, of Zorua-U, or Zorua-H, because it can just block Rapid Spin, and that's perfectly fine. And then I have to skip to the near the end of the game, because this eventually does win the game. Also, how many times... Is it 4 or 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Sludge Bombs. It's got 30% chance to poison. What is this? And then, like, also one para, so it's just kind of funny. But then we get to the end game. And the reason why that's important is because from here, Wattrel threatens to really sweep. And it can be really annoying to deal with. So you go Bramblin, that's all okay. Then that crunches in, and then you go Crab. But the important bit to note is that Wattrel can very easily just destroy these three, and it's really annoying to deal with, because it can just Hurricane against Crab, and that's it. And both of Zorua-H, this is a bulky spread, and Toad can't really touch this too effectively. And, like, oh yeah, Roost, and that's really hard to deal with, but then you can do Knock. And then because you have Shadow Sneak, you win the game. And otherwise, I mean, that Hurricane does... That miss is kind of annoying, but you can still win because Zorua-H can just Shadow Sneak and kill, so that's pretty nice. But also, it's kind of weak priority and can be really a liability in other situations. And then here we have... Oh, yes, Lady Rider versus Damrata. This is regular Zorua, and although it's up against a sleeping Gastly, it's really hard to switch into because of how powerful the knockoff is. Like, oh yeah, I don't want to have my Marionette get knocked. I don't want to have my Mankey lose its Choice Scarf. I want to still have Diglett because I want to be able to trap, like, well, you can't really trap too much on this team, but also, like, I want to have this so that way I can deal with Wattrel significantly better. And it just puts Damrata in a really bad situation. And then you have to sack Diglett, and then it gets a whole bunch of advantage off of that, because now Wattrel just sort of does whatever. I mean, at this point, you're already doing, like, everything, and then also you win the speed tie versus Mankey, and now it's significantly worse off for the rest of the game. So you can just win with Diglett, so that's really annoying. But point is, like, having that kind of pressure that you normally wouldn't have with Zorua-H over here, just because it's got less attack and doesn't have stab knock, it really, really helped out here. And then for the final one, this is actually just a funny exchange, because, like, Diglett dies, and then it's just kind of funny where, like, oh yeah, I go to my Toad school so that way I can block Shelter from setting up, and then I use, actually it's a Zorua, and actually this is a Zorua. It's just funny to see this mirror match happen. Then Nox, they trade Nox, and then it's a speed tie, and that could be a bit annoying. But with that being said, I think overall, Zorua-H is a good addition to the metagame. It's not broken, it's not overpowered, but I think that this provisional placement that I mentioned earlier, it seems pretty pretty just. This Zorua, like even with like the advantage, like, oh yeah, well it's prankster mons. You don't see these very often, like Impidimp and Shroodle. I mean, I think Shroodle's much better than we give credit to. But Impidimp's at like B, and Shroodle is at B-. It still needs to be updated, because this was top 10 when it came to Gastly meta. I think it's still pretty good, but the main issue was like, oh yeah, well you beat other Zorua-H. Like, well, that's really situational as is, because I have to beat others as like Zorua-H, when I could still just run special coverage Zorua-H and it's whatever. And like, although I can outspeed Diglett, I could still have other options for it. So... And even then, it can't even switch in if it wants to, because like, oh yeah, I can just knock off its item and then significantly worse off for the rest of the game. Or against Will-O-Wisp, so... Overall, like, both of them are good, and both of them are recommended even. It's just that you have to get used to Illusion. But I think the big issue is just... You just kind of accept the fact that although you have a stronger knock and you still have U-turn, having Will-O-Wisp support is just so insane because it enables so many things. Like, oh yeah, I cripple Crab. Oh yeah, I get my setup sweepers to do a whole bunch of other cool stuff. And I still have the utility of knock, and then I can run whatever I want in the force slot. Do I want to run Bitter Malice, so that way the opponent can't just do whatever? Do I want to run Shadow Ball or Terra Blast, so that way you have a good stab option that's not physically dependent? I think just overall, Zorua-H has more flexibility, because it has a lot of utility from just 4 moves. Whereas, although Zorua-H is a bit more of a specialist because you have knockoff and you have to do this sort of thing, it's more... I'm trying to think of the best way to put it, because this is more, like, not randomness, but you have to be able to play really carefully around this because of how it warps, not necessarily the entirety of the metagame, but its kit is so fantastic, plus illusion, plus this typing is so hard to deal with, whereas Zorua has significantly less going on for it, even if it has stab knockoff, stab knucker, snucker punch, or U-turn, anything like that. So, because of how the metagame is, how valuable burn is on opposing Pokemon, and the ability to be a really threatening setup sweeper both on webs and outside of webs, Zorua-H seems to be the better Pokemon. Thank you all very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you could like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all that good stuff. Leave me a comment down below of what you want to see in the next video, all that sorts of stuff. I very much appreciate it. Thank you all very much for watching, and have a good day.